Hello, I'm Paul Orselli, President and Chief Instigator at Paul Orselli Workshop here on Long Island. And I am super happy to be joined today by Jessica Sickler. Hi, Jessica. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good, even better now that you're here. So, Jessica, we are going to talk about interesting findings related to your evaluation work. But before we start the main part of the conversation, I always like to ask folks to just tell us a little bit about their background and sort of how you ended up doing what you're doing now. A lot of students and emerging museum professionals seem to watch these videos. So I always think it's interesting for people to hear how people ended up where they ended up. So tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll launch into the main part of the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a winding path, I think, for most of us in the field. So I like to say that I am an evaluator, I'm a data nerd, but I am an educator at heart. And that is sort of how I started my path, was in my graduate degree was in museum education at Bank Street, as well as classroom teaching. So I spent time with the germ-laden K through six audience for a little while. And so I think I bring that into my work a lot, is thinking about the educational processes and pedagogies and how people learn. But I did find when I was in teaching environments, I was more interested in figuring out what was going on inside their heads than like teaching them to, build those skills and things. And so I said, yeah, my calling is over on the research and evaluation side rather than on the instructional side. But a lot of who we work with are educators and exhibit developers, all of us in that sort of education space in museums and other informal learning environments too. So we cross over a lot.
Cool. Well, I'll give a little shout out to Bank Street. I used to teach there in the graduate program. Um, I was particularly interested in speaking with you because I saw something you posted online about screens, and that's a favorite topic of mine. So I thought maybe today you could share maybe two or three. We'll talk about some findings that have particularly stood out, especially in the post-COVID era. We are now, I hope we're in the post-COVID era, let's call it that. Um, but I know screens was one of the things I was interested in you talking about, but I'll let you deal the evaluation results cards however you would like. Tell us what has been standing out for you and your evaluation peers recently in your work with museums and similar cultural institutions.
Yeah, Paul, when you sort of put that question out of like, what have we been seeing that is different post-COVID or in this living with COVID era that we're in? And there are a few things that have sort of stood out for us. I think on exhibits, and the one that you and I started chatting about was we saw a marked shift in visitor attention in exhibits towards stuff over screens. And I use the word stuff because every museum's stuff is different. Um, but that there was more attention towards, objects, artifacts, animals, whatever it is, versus sort of digital interactives. And so we can talk more about that. That was definitely one we see that we think maybe is a post-COVID shift, although perhaps not. On the program side, because I said I work with a lot with education, our educators have been noticing some shifts in teen engagement and how that shifts in teens, their lives, their things about them that has changed how they're having to approach and challenges they're facing in terms of engaging teens in certain kinds of programs. Um, and I think the third one is I was getting to thinking about it and chatting with our team here, uh, is sort of the almost return to normalcy that is it seems to be happening. And I say that with some caveats, but in terms of germ avoidance that we were like really heightened to in like 2020, 2021 as we were returning to our spaces, how that has maybe reverted, at least for a segment of our audience that maybe is taking us back to a more, an earlier time, a more innocent time.
All right. Maybe. Sounds like I'm gonna say screens, teens, and scenes. Let's have three rhymes there. Let's be
I love it.
alliterative in that. I'm always interested, especially as mostly an exhibits person, but of course I'm interested in the educational value of museums and exhibits, of course. Um, so how how is it that you were able to gather this notion based on your data and the things you've collected that people seem to be leaning more towards stuff, to use your words, great word, stuff rather than screens. Like, I mean, I'm assuming you don't say, "Do you like screens?" Because if you ask somebody like me, I'd be like, "No, I don't want to see any screens in museums. Sorry, screen people. I don't really feel totally that way, but more towards stuff than screens for myself." So how do you actually start to gauge that when you're doing your evaluation work?
Yeah, I think the place we saw it most concretely was through timing and tracking studies. So observationally watching visitors moving through an exhibition and just which elements are they stopping and attending to, and how long they're stopping and attending at them. And one of the places this really stood out, although it wasn't the only, is with the American Museum of Natural History. We helped them evaluate a couple exhibit spaces in the new Gilder Center. Gosh, I guess that was 2 years ago.
Well, it's still pretty,
Um,
I'd still say it's pretty new.
Time is a construct. I don't remember when anything happened. But in in a couple of those spaces, we found they have both amazing collections on display and they have some really amazing like interactive digital touch screens to go deeper on those specimens or collections and things like that. And we found this marked pattern of people being riveted by the collections, by mounted insects, bugs pinned to a table
Those, those, those,
beautifully,
those,
beautifully.
those collection objects and the live insects and arthropods they have in that particular space are pretty impressive, I do have to say.
They are, and they were beautifully done. Um, Next to them, they have a digital interactive, beautiful screen that lets you like look really closely at an insect, spin it around, zoom in, really, really explore it. And there are other digital interactives as well. And just for the most part, in aggregate, people stopped way more at those specimen areas and spent way more time at them. And it wasn't just in that exhibit. We also saw it at some other, the collections core and other exhibits that they've had. And we've seen it other places as well, where visitors seemed to be gravitating towards the stuff over the screens. And again, I don't know, this isn't completely post-COVID, but the exhibit designers, when we were meeting with them, sort of doing our meaning making sessions, our data parties, after the evaluation was data was all in, they were really struck by it and were feeling there was some kind of market shift from maybe earlier days when digital interactives were more, oh, it's hands-on, it's, splashy and shiny, and that there was this market shift. And in chatting with the folks at AMNH, they've been continuing to think about how does that influence their choices and designs going forward in exhibitions. It doesn't mean screens are going away, I'm sure, but thinking about, I mean, maybe it does, but I
No,
doubt it.
no, I mean, I'll just let me just say, I am not a Luddite. I am not an anti-screen person. You're watching this on a screen, whoever you are, watching this in YouTube land. But I think we have enough screens. This is my little flashing light here. This is not Jessica Sickler or Evaluation's opinion. This is Paul Orselli's opinion. I think we have enough access and exposure to screens throughout our lives that perhaps museums could be a little bit of a oasis from screens, but I know that is a charged statement. We'll leave that alone. We're talking about the data and what you found out from timing and tracking. So, was there any way, Jessica, related to screens, and then we'll move on to teens, instead of people saying, gosh, this guy's like shaking his fist and saying, you kids get off my lawn. Stop putting those screens in museums. I'm not saying that. Um, was there any part of your evaluation work or follow-up work that you were able to delve deeper into beyond timing and tracking studies? Why, like, what visitors' opinions about screens versus stuff were?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think we knew that was going to be a finding and it wasn't a focus, so we didn't do that follow-up study, which would be awesome to do.
Not yet, not yet.
To dig in because I think, interestingly, I'm a sidebar here. To your earlier point of like, did we ask visitors, do you want stuff or do you want screens? And I think we hear a lot the blithe comment sometimes that we liked that an exhibit was hands-on, whatever that kind of means, that the visitors have kind of been trained, they know that's what they want, but what do they mean when they say that is
Right.
kind of the question. And I think sometimes that's why behavior is interesting to study because it sort of tells you when they vote with their feet, where do they go, what do they do, what do they put their attention on. And I will say, just watching people engage in really close looking at objects and specimens when they were kind of beautifully displayed was really amazing. And I know as a museum person, like that is where you can have like this really deep learning and where that magic happens. And there are other places where screens and games can get at things differently, but maybe it's for a subset or it's the way to deep dive into information, but kind of think about how do your objects, collections, physical pieces, whatever they are, how do they help tell your story? How do your labels align with what people are looking at? Because that's the thing they're really interested in. Um, so, to your point of sort of what people liked, I think, I mean, what we found is people sort of discovered the diversity of insects in there. And that really came, I think, a lot from all of the insects that were on display and things like that. So,
And at the end of the day, that was probably the primary aim of the folks at the museum, regardless of the media or the methods that were used to transmit those messages. So,
yes, and the
um,
wonder and amazement and thinking they're so cool and like all of that was what was happening. And so, yeah, go stuff.
Thank you for sharing that information about screens. I'll just say that the only hate mail I've ever gotten on social media has been when I've come out against screens. So
Right.
direct your negative comments towards me, not towards Jessica. And that will be a segue to from screens to teens. So what stood out about about teens? What did you find out about teens in your evaluation work?
Yeah, so we've been working with the Teen Science Café Network for a whole lot of years. And we were their research partner from like just before COVID hit
Everything's
through
sort of
now.
before and after COVID, isn't it?
Well, that was you asked me about like changes
No,
relative
no,
to
no.
COVID
I mean, obviously things have, whether we are in a post-COVID era or not, things have certainly changed in all sorts of ways since COVID. I'll say that, including the prices of materials for exhibits, which seem to keep going up, but that's not what you're talking about. So how has the behavior, at least the observed or reported behavior of teens in these teen network spaces sort of shifted or changed from your perspective?
Yeah, what we saw and heard from our leaders around the country who were working with teens in these programs um, is the challenges of navigating teen programs through COVID. I think a lot of people initially thought, well, it's the shift to virtual, right? We couldn't gather in person for cafes, which is what we'd always done. We have to do this. Therefore, that
Seems
was hard.
reasonable. Seems
It
reasonable.
does. It absolutely does. And I'm not saying that didn't happen, but when we dug a little deeper with our adult leaders, we heard is it was so much more than just virtual is hard, because what it meant was that period changed a whole lot of structures of how they interacted with their teen leaders and their teen participants. And the core of a teen science cafe is kind of for teens by teens, and the by teens is a teen leadership council that helps put together. It's not me, an adult, going, here, you want to do it.
Right.
It's teens saying, we're interested in this. Let's do this together for our peers. And that teen leadership structure kind of broke down during those years of having to be physically apart, which also created sort of a loss of institutional culture and memory. I recently equated it to college football. I'm a sports fan, where college football coaches, man, they have a rough. They're constantly losing their best players, right? Like you're constantly having to bring in a whole new crop and train them and
Every
keep them,
every 4 or 5 years.
if you're lucky anymore. But we won't go into that. And that is can be what it's like for a teen program leader, because their kids, they get older and they graduate and they go off to college and wonderful things. So they have to keep that culture going.
So, just to break in a little bit, so
Yeah.
then are you saying that, I mean, obviously that transition of teens, let's say high school age or a little before, and then they go off to college. So maybe that is the analogy to college football. But are you saying that pre-COVID, there was more of an opportunity to seamlessly pass the baton in a way?
Yeah, they could, the established cafes could build up sort of I'm going to call it a culture over time,
Yeah,
where think about your high school yearbook, where the seniors are in a leadership position and they're
yeah,
sort of passing it down to the sophomores who are just coming in and a little
right.
curious, who then become seniors, and you keep that going. And the pandemic broke that. Because now you're trying to gather your teen leaders in this environment and it's hard and they're going through hell at home or whatever,
Yeah.
and the
So,
culture broke.
okay, so that makes sense. But then the immediate question in my head is, okay, at some point, these teen network programs, these by teen, for teens programs, had to start. I mean, like they haven't always existed,
Yep.
so they so I guess to put it in a question rather than a statement, isn't it sort of analogous to that? Like, oh, okay, in a sense, they have to do a restart or a reboot, or is there something else that shifted that it makes it not? I mean, nobody wants to restart or reboot anything if they don't have to, but are there other factors going on that make us a straightforward restart or reboot of these teen programs additionally difficult?
Yeah. So as even established programs, I mean, lots of programs were just decimated and ended, but as programs restarted or even ones just starting up, the next thing we heard from adult leaders was that the landscape of working with teens had kind of shifted. The teens had shifted a bit through that difficult period of having spent maybe 2 years in online school, and with all the stuff we know about how chaotic that period of their development was. And our adult leaders were saying it's different now, right? It's not just like restarting exactly the way. I'm having to find new ways of connecting with teens. They were getting more ghosting in general, both of events and leadership events. So kids saying, oh, yeah, yeah, I'll be there, and then
And
just
never showing up.
not.
Hmm.
Yeah. We've even heard that this may have been an isolated case, but boy, it floored me of a location told us kids in their area just aren't getting their driver's licenses when they turn 16. They're not eager to drive because I guess because a parent will drive them around. And so they're transportation becomes an issue to come to meetings, to come to cafes, because you don't get that like self-sufficient kind of 16, 17-year-old.
Hmm.
Again, that may have been an isolated case, but it was notable and a little shocking to some of us who were eager to
Huh.
drive at that age.
Well, you've certainly got grist for further follow-up studies for at least the first two things we've talked about. But okay, so there's teens. So in keeping with my alliterative usage, we move from screens to teens to scenes, like the entire sort of environment that people are engaging with. And what in your studies or observations seems to have stood out or shifted in that regard?
Yeah, and this has not been a study necessarily that we've done, but more just kind
You're
of, I
such a
will say,
good
I don't have data to
evaluator.
back it up.
Jessica, like every good evaluator, qualifies her statements, unlike me, who charges like a bull in the china shop and says, screens, see, she said screens, you should cut that. That's not what she said. She's sharing the data and not being goaded on by my hijinks on the other side of the screen. So, with that statement, what are you finding out about museum environments, exhibit area, or programmatic environments in museums?
So the contrast for me is remembering those early days of the pandemic and then the return to museums when we were very conscious of how do we retain the interactivity of exhibits in a way that people feel safe coming back in a time when we were kind of still scared to be around
So,
other
so now,
humans.
now you're saying the gloves are literally off. People are happy to touch or lick or do whatever they want to do in a space. That's again, Paul Orselli just said people are licking exhibits. Jessica didn't. So
I didn't, but in a certain kind of children's museum, 100% they
yeah,
are.
I mean, there's if you work in a children's museum, you know that sometimes things go in kids' mouths and then they need to be taken off the floor. That's how it is.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's not happening in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, but I don't know that for sure either. All right, so enough hijinks and hilarity from my side. So what are you taking away then? So it seems like people are less apprehensive about interacting, let's just say interacting writ large in museum environments now. I'll take that as a good thing. I mean, do you take that as a good thing or?
I think I think I generally take it as a good thing. As a like minor germaphobe in a modern day, it freaks me out a little bit. Like, and I think that maybe it is. I think there may be a segmenting of audiences too, right? And so the folks who are eagerly coming back into these spaces, who have no hesitancy, are probably going to interact in a lot of the ways they did before back in 2017 when they came to your exhibits. They're gonna have no hesitation to put a VR headset on that, to quote one of our data collectors. So a visitor put on a VR headset in like 2019 and was like, man, that smells like another person's face, because it really did. Like there was like one after another putting on a VR
There's a
headset.
real, there's a real advertisement.
But I think people do it now for the cool experience. I put one on back then. Now, would I? I don't know. But that's just me. I think there is a segment who is a 2017 visitor, nice, innocent. They're back,
I don't
baby.
know. Is the return on investment of smelling somebody else's face worth the VR experience? I don't know. I
I
mean,
don't know. It was pretty cool to be like throwing bones to make a dinosaur.
okay,
I will say that.
okay.
I suspect there may be another segment that maybe is a little more like me and still a little cautious
Yeah, yeah.
about things that you're like that you can't forget the year of our Lord 2020 and what we lived through.
Well, and this is of course the challenge for any sort of person who is dealing with the public. There is a wide range of attitudes and experiences that people have and want to have in a museum or a grocery store or any other sort of public situation. And we need to be mindful and respectful of all those people. I mean, you know, you are admittedly, you are in an environment with a bunch of other people. Like if you're at your museum in New York City, you are just going to be there with a bunch of people. So how you feel about that is the starting point in my mind, not to mention which then whether you want to touch things in that environment, but there we are.
And that may tie to, I think I've been hearing that attendance is still not back to
Yeah.
2017, 2018 levels, probably for a
Yeah.
variety of reasons.
Yeah.
But it could be that, again, that sort of self-segmenting of who is gung-ho and who is not. I mean, as I hope, useful um, take home from this, I do think about, we wrote an article with our colleagues at AMNH for a whole different project of
Which, by the way, since this is on YouTube, we can always put links and resources and references below in the description. So we'll hope to include those for you to dive deeper into the stuff that Jessica and I've been talking about. But I digress. Go ahead.
Yeah, and it's a very practitioner, or this is an academic journal because those are lame. Um, so what
She
we
did
wrote
say
about,
that. I didn't say that. She did say that.
see, you can come at me, academics, come at me. Um, is we we had to take data we collected on things like interactive headsets and a lot of very touch heavy things, and we were collecting data literally up until AMNH shut down in March of 2020. My data
Yeah, yeah,
collector was just telling me a story of they had hand sanitizer and a visitor stole it because it was
yeah,
during the
yeah.
shutdown or the shortage. Um, but what we did with their exhibits team, which was just so amazing, was we collected all this pre-pandemic data about how visitors used and learned from digital media in exhibits, not all bad. And we had to pivot and think about what could they take from those pre-pandemic studies and apply it to a post-pandemic world as they were just preparing to reopen to the public in
Okay.
2020, 2021. And what came out of that were ideas their exhibit team came up with for making more hands-off interactives that were still digital interactives, but were options for ways of people to engage with content in, interactive media that maybe other than putting a headset on, or ways to translate things where you're using your personal device
Yeah, yeah.
instead of
Or
the
or
thing
or
everybody touched.
or eye tracking or body tracking or
One
things
was
like
a body tracking activity they had called Star Pose, where you would pose in the position of constellations. But that was actually pre-pandemic. It was like that. And we're like, hey, so I think to your point, Paul, for me, a takeaway is maybe like still diversifying the ways you engage your visitors in interactive experiences that are totally hands-on, germ laden, go for it. Because come on, we live in the world. Some other ones that are different ways for other people to still engage with content that maybe are a little more hands off.
well, and I always sincerely think that constraints, whatever they are, breed more creative solutions.
Great.
So, if you want to consider some of these things constraints, my rejoinder to you is come up with a creative solution related to them. Well, Jessica, I really appreciate you taking the time to share these sort of top level results on teens, screens, and scenes, or screens, teens, and scenes. That's the order we talked about them. And as I mentioned just a while ago, we'll have some references or resources, links to your work and other things germane to this conversation. And then in a future video, we will solve the rest of the world's problems. But let's just work with the things we talked about today. Um, I thank you. I appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely. It was a joy. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.